I actually flew out September 10th, right, from Hawaii, and then of 2001. And as soon as I got there, I'm like, what is going on? I, totally oblivious because nothing was on the news yet about what had freaking happened at the Twin Towers and Pentagon. And I'm just like, oh crap! Like they had all the barriers out, they had helicopters, spotlights, all the dogs were out. I'm like, man. So my immediate thought, I'm like, man, Kim Jong-un must be fucking up. Like he must have stuck his toe across like the DMZ and been like,
Hi, brother.
Yeah.
Thanks for coming on, man.
No problem.
This is a conversation I wanted to have for a little bit now. And, we've known each other for, I'm not even going to try to calculate that many years. So let's talk a little bit about yourself, your military career, some questionable actions that we've had throughout our life, whatever, man. So
okay.
That's all you, man.
All right. So this kind of pick up, the theme is kind of what makes Bol. Definitely got to start, I think, in my childhood. Yeah, had my folks, pre-married their entire lives and stuff like that. My dad passed last year from cancer. But we were always, they were very like super strict, like religious family kind of growing up and everything else like that. So that was one of the only sticking points, that I had. I was like, I don't really like this, church stuff. Like, I want to go out and play with my friends or ride my bike or, like build ramps and jump off and hurt myself and stuff like that.
Right.
But, it was always church stuff. But a lot of that stuff came from, like my dad, as far as like, when you talk about like one of the things that has guided me from when I was very little up into present day is work ethic, right? Like my dad, he was up in Northern California, had a family farm there for several generations. It was peach, walnuts, a couple other crops. They had a big farm, just tons of fields, everything else like that. He had like 5 or 6 brothers because, at that time, if you had a farm, you just kept having kids, so you had free labor to, work and stuff like that. But to basically turn all this stuff around on the farm, like they, farmers' hours are no joke. Like, they get up, like while it's still dark, and then they work until it's dark, and then go get a couple hours of sleep, and they're up again taking care of the animals, the crops, whatever they got to, do. So that stuff was really, I think, where I got a lot of my intensity, because as far as like the work, like my dad was not one of those, here's a participation trophy, whatever. He's like, oh man, you didn't run fast. Well, then you need to train on running fast. So then if you get 1, 2, or 3, you get a ribbon or a trophy or whatever, stop being a bitch and think that the world owes you shit. I'm like, so, but that was awesome because it freaking went over. I kind of stuck with that because he had said, and then this stuck with me forever. He said, you will never be the smartest person, or you'll never be the most athletically gifted person in any situation that you're at, but where you can beat both of the people who are smarter than you and more athletically fit is going to be in your work ethic, because people do not want to work past their threshold of what they think they should be doing. Like They want to go to a certain point. Okay, I got that. And they want to go off and do all their, fun stuff, go and do hood rat shit with their friends, like whatever they're doing. So he's like, but if you're willing to put the work in, he goes, you're going to get that many more reps, that much more time on that specific subject. So eventually you're going to surpass them, like with your skill level, just because of your work ethic and putting all that extra time in while they're off playing, you're still training or you're still studying or, like whatever it is. And so that was something that really stuck with like the notes. So basically be a super persistent, stubborn bastard, and it's really helped. Yeah, me. So it's helped out a lot. See, growing up, like my dad, he was our soccer coach for a bunch of years. And we talked in the other, just briefly in like one of the other conversations we were having. I wanted to do like martial arts, but they're like, no, you're big and you're going to be a bully if you learn martial arts and all this stuff like that. So I had to settle for soccer, and that's all we had. So I played soccer up until pretty much like junior high school and stuff. My dad was always my coach, like either for my brother's team or for my team. And it was, that was always really cool because he was like super intense, like how he coached us and stuff. Like we would go out for the first 30 minutes of our soccer practice, and we would have like 4 soccer practices a week and stuff after school was over. All he would do is make us run laps, and then we would do like sprints and suicides on the soccer field, back and forth, and
Sounds horrible.
Oh, it sucked. And then you would get into the actual like soccer skills and everything else like that. And to like the point where we're all running around like, because what is it? I signed up for soccer, not a fucking track team, So, but there's method to his madness because he liked to sign us up for all these freaking high level tournaments and stuff because it was club soccer. And so he went to these tournaments, and a lot of time, very much like a BJJ tournament, if you just have your match, like you come off of that stuff, you get a drink of water, and then it's like, okay, here's your next guy, and you just do 2 or 3 matches in a row and all this stuff like that. So you have to have a good like a cardio and stuff. So that always happened in these tournaments. And he goes, it doesn't happen all the time, but when it does happen, I know it will happen to us, and I want to be prepared. And so it was awesome because we had fresh legs when we would play back-to-back games. So you would have another team coming off from another field. We would get on there, and then we would just dominate because nobody was tired like the entire game. Right. And so that was really cool. And then, of course, then it's back to practice, and it's like, fucking track team, fucking runner. But then we always loved it when we were actually in competition because we could go for like 3 games in a row and, just freaking continuously. So that was really cool. After that, he was our scoutmaster, and like, you got to, consider too, like he didn't know the game of soccer before he started coaching. Right. And then, but like he learned how to do it, and he learned how to be a really good coach. And like it was to the point, I just found this out from one of my old players, or, very good teammates, those players on his team. At his funeral, like we were talking about, remember the old soccer days and stuff like that when we were kids and your dad was our coach, and they're like, oh yeah. And these are guys that have gone on to play, freaking pro or like college football, pro soccer, like all this other stuff. And they're like, your dad, from like the way that he coached, they said, I've never had another coach, whether in professional or semi-professional sports, that ever meant that much to, or like coached us the way he goes, he would just find a way to like reach into your heart and make you fucking want to do it for him, and he goes, and then like when he said if we failed or we lost by a goal or something like that, he goes, we all felt like shit because we felt like we let your dad down. But, so he's like, he had that kind of charismatic, freaking just drive that he passed on to everybody. So I found out, this is kind of a funny story. He goes, remember it was the Hotspurs was the name of the team. It was San Diego Hotspurs, right? So they came from a very rich, freaking part of town down in San Diego, I think. And so we were down there for like the Sunny Delight, freaking tournament, or whatever it was. And so we had, been together. This team had been together for about 2 or 3 years. So same players on the club, everything else like that. We had a couple changes, but not much. So we got down in there. We had played, the freaking Hotspurs are like defending champions for like 4 years in a row or whatever. So he's like, hey, I want to beat the Hotspurs. Like, okay, cool. So we tied him one time, we lost to him one time, and we beat him one time. And I was like, oh, okay, cool. So, and that was, throughout these different tournaments. But I didn't find out until all these years later, last year at my dad's funeral, they go, oh yeah, man, remember when we beat the Hotspurs? And I'm like, yeah. I'm like, that was pretty cool. And then he goes, yeah, I mean, even with all the stuff that the Hotspurs had. I said, what do the Hotspurs have? He said, he goes, oh, like you didn't know? I said, no. He goes, all those team, he goes, like the Hotspurs were from like all these rich like lawyer families and, everything. He goes, they paid for an English soccer coach to come over and coach them during the season there. And all of the parents got together and paid his salary and all of his expenses for him to live there for the year. And then in the off season for soccer, they would fly the whole team to England, and he would go and to like the FIFA stadiums where all the pros are playing on like English Premier League and everything else like that, and they would practice with all the pro guys. He goes, that's why that fucking team was so good, because they had pro coaches that they paid out of their pocket for AYSO, all youth soccer organization that's supposed to be like pickup games to whoever's close in your neighborhood. So
must be nice.
So that's like that was really cool. Like he had practiced what he preached. He freaking learned soccer, and he learned how to train dudes to play soccer, and at such a high level. And that was his goal, was like, hey, I want to see how far I can get this. And I have a big trophy case of all the soccer crap. It's probably up in my attic or something like that. But we won a lot of trophies. And that was his other thing too. He's like, okay, we're gonna practice. We had kept going around in a circle. He said, we're gonna practice doing the shake and take, for the trophy. They were like, what are you talking about? He goes, he said, you always take it with your left hand. You look at the person, you look them in the eye, and then you shake your hand, you say thank you, and you turn to take your picture, and then you go. And we're like, oh. We were like, why are we? And like we asked because we thought it was silly, but like we asked him, dead pan serious, we're like, why are we practicing this? And he's like, because I plan on winning a lot of trophies, and you guys don't need to look like freaking jackasses when you're up there going, you go, I've been here before, thank you, sir, and then you freaking go, and we're just
awesome.
We're like, whoa. So that was set the platform for that, and
yeah, I like it.
Super, super cool. And then as me, like my brother's like 4 years older than me, but we were both in the Boy Scout program at the same time. So he goes, I want to be the scout master and scout leader. And again, he grew up on a farm. So his, from early morning until late at night, he was doing farm stuff. And he had never really gone camping, never been part of, stuff like that. And so he had to, figure out how to fish. He had to figure out how to backpack, how to, do all the outdoor, skills, how to start a fire, how to cook food, how to plan, how to do all these things. And so, we had a lot of, awesome trips that we, I still have memories to this day of freaking, catching fish and up in Mammoth Mountains in California and going out to all these other things where we were just, sitting out there doing that. But, and that really kind of showed me it's like, hey, you don't have to be like born into something or, like a legacy person of someone who played a professional sport. Like, oh my, his dad played football back then. So he's around it. Like it's, if you have something that you want to be good at, then like you decide to be good at it.
Right.
And that was his, like another one of those things. He goes, if you want to be good at something, don't just wish and hope and say, oh, that would be really cool to be good at this. He goes, just fucking decide to do it. Like you decide that it's time to eat because I'm hungry. And then it's not like, oh, I wish I had a hamburger. Like you go and you get a hamburger, you go get it and you just eat it because it's the same concept. So
what's more impressive about that is the fact that that was at a time there that YouTube wasn't around, and all that information was dug out of books and dug out of researching and that type of thing. So and that you said that you guys did a lot of soccer and that type of thing. What were the age ranges that you did that?
Let's see, probably from about 8 until I was about 14 or 15.
So that set that foundation of hard work and then you moved right into Scouts, right?
Moved into Scouts, did all that stuff. Got my Eagle Scout when I was 18, and then after that, graduated, and then went to the Air Force after that. So that was cool. But like even throughout my Air Force career, all of that, pre-training that I got from him and all those like wise, sage advices, all of it was applicable to, going to military school, going to selections, going to, whatever, because it's like, oh man.
So if you could just, tell us a real brief overview of your military career, and then we'll just kind of like flesh that out so that everybody knows like where you're coming from and, that type of thing.
So I came in right after high school was complete. I was a 22-year TACP JTAC. Started out conventional, eventually worked my way up to AFSOC, stayed there, retired out of AFSOC. And then, of course, in 2001, had the War on Terror. So we went on just about 6 months on, 6 months off rotations until about 2010. Right. And then that's when I came to the schoolhouse to teach over at AST at STTS, where we all linked up back again. And then finished off doing T&E for the J model gunship that was coming online. So
just so that people understand, because we've had this conversation before, TACP, combat controller, catch me, fuck me, Superman. But as far as AFSOC goes in the Air Force, there's a number of their squadrons or personnel that attaches to special forces, and even the teams don't seem to know the difference between the Air Force guy. Yeah. Like it's normally like, that's the Air Force guy. I'm like, well, did you have JTAC? Did you have, that combat controller? Like, like in what they'll do is it was Air Force, like,
Yeah.
and
Well,
so,
for for AFSOC, you got PJs, combat controllers. You got like AFSOC TACP guys, and then they had combat weather guys, but now they're like SNR. They changed that career field just recently, and then they changed AFSOC to aspect war and all this stuff. So they're just making changes. But essentially, when you have JTAC, that's like an extra rating on top of your job. So both combat controllers and TACPs can pick up a JTAC rating.
Okay.
And then from traditionally, a TACP will support all the conventional like Army units, like maneuver units from division down to rated teams, whatever. And then as your career goes by and you get your experience, you can start dropping your like package to go up the ladder to AFSOC or go to like the 17th STS to do straight JTAC work with Rangers and stuff like that out of Fort Benning. Awesome. And so that's usually about 3% of the career field that actually make that jump.
Right.
And so that's the fun thing. And then with being the Air Force guy, it was cool with the JTAC because like you run as a single ship out to 1 team, 2 team, 3 teams, sometimes 4 teams at a fire base, and you're the only JTAC supporting all 4 teams. And so you show up, and these teams have been together for training for a lot of time. So that's like a cool boys club for whatever, and you're not in it. And so you stay the Air Force guy, but then when you're a JTAC, it's cool because after your first troops in contact and like you call in freaking aircraft and start setting things on fire and turning like villages into parking lots and shit, then they're like, oh, that's pretty fucking cool. Hey Air Force guy, what's your name? And so that's like when you get your name and they're like, oh yeah, freaking bull, cool man, or like whoever the JTAC is. But if you're just not, if you're not controlling or like you get like a really crappy place, you're just dropping peace bombs your whole, freaking deployment, then you will probably still be the Air Force guy. But for all the teams that you drop for, like you actually get your name, and then they'll be like, oh, hey, we have a beer. You want to have a beer? Like, oh, a beer. So, whereas before it's like, no, you drink water, like the fucking rest of everybody. So
but that's a good segue. Like, so for the longest time, I didn't know that you had a first name. And for most people, they don't know that you have first name. I tell people all the time to fuck with them that your ID actually says Bull and it doesn't say anything else.
Yeah.
So what's the history behind that? When was the first time you were called Bull, and why the hell did it stick?
So there was one of my pretty old mentors. My first duty station was in Hawaii. His name is Mitch Quinn. He had passed away a few years ago, and he was our ops superintendent when he was there. And he was like, he's one of those ones that could just, freaking look through your soul kind of guys. And everybody was kind of intimidated of him just because, as loud and as straight to the point and up in your face as he was really smart off, freaking off his feet too. Cause he studied and he knew like all kinds of things. And so if something was messed up and he would freaking call you out and you're like, oh crap, freaking Mitch is going to freaking land. So we became, they would play a game. And so, this is how I got my call sign, Bull, or like my name Bull, and it stuck with me to this day. So I used to, instead of having this shaggy mane, I used to, basically just shave my head, down the skin because it was easier. And I was an E2, making like $50 a month in the military. So if I could save $8 on a haircut, like I could actually, $8, I can buy a sandwich, and so I just, when my head is shaved, I look like pretty Richard Mall from Night Court,
Okay, yeah.
So anybody that watched that show, back in the 80s and the 90s, he was the bailiff, and he was a big, tall, freaking huge dude with a shaved head, and he was the bailiff in the courtroom. So he had little bit parts in the thing, but mostly just kind of stood in the background like a big lurking character. So that was. We'd come in there and he would play a game every Friday. He would ask you like a trivia question about a certain function on the radio, a certain characteristic of a vehicle, or show you a flashcard of what different enemy aircraft and different enemy stuff look like. And if you could positively identify or answer his question correct, then you got to go home early on Friday. And so there's always a line out of his door like after lunch because everybody's trying to get home. However, if you failed your question and got it wrong, then you were staying to, do all the cleanup, take out the trash, vacuum all the floors, all the stuff, and clean everything up. So it was kind of a freaking competitive thing. So I was there. It's like day one, and so I go in the office, and he's just sitting there behind his desk, and I'm all locked up there, and he freaking looks. And he goes, "Who the fuck do you think you are?" And I'm like, "Oh shit." I'm like,
Is that my question?
I'm like, Senior Airman Adams. And he's like, "Nah." And he just like stares at me like, this is like uncomfortable silence. And he goes, "You ever seen fucking Night Court?" And I go, "Oh yeah, it's good shit." He goes, "You look like Bull. You're Bull." And then he goes, "Grr," and like puts the pager, and he goes, "Attention to the squadron. From now on, for Senior Airman Adams will only answer to the name Bull. That is all." And he turns off the intercom, and I'm like, he goes, "Okay, you can go." And I said, "You didn't ask me a question." He goes, "You want a question now?" I'm like, "Nope." He goes, "Get the fuck out of here." I'm like, So I left. So, like over the years, and like that was the thing. He was very, to some people, he was very like intimidating, to where they didn't want to, like he's coming down the hall, they would go the other way. But the dude had a freaking heart of gold, and with my persistence and just being the way that I am, I was one of the only people that could make him laugh, and he'd be like, "Oh," so it was, like that was awesome. So that was kind of the end. He liked to go scuba diving, so we became freaking scuba diving partners, everything else like that. But he was one of the people that I don't know if I didn't have him as a mentor that early in my career, I don't know that I would have stayed in for as long as I stayed in, because he was one of those guys that he loved the military. His whole family had military history, everything else like that. But he was like such a genuine person. And so once you got past that hard shell, you can see just the way that, he would take care of his guys. Like, and that's the thing too, is if you were, no matter if you were an officer, you were some of this stuff, if you were messing with one of his guys, he would come and just, that was it. We're like, "Oh man, that ALO is going to fucking get it." In the other room, and they come with their tail between their legs and everything, but did not freaking allow anybody to mess with his guys. And so I'm like, man, that's freaking something I can get behind, someone who actually like talks about a family concept and all the other stuff, but then actually treats his guys like, his family. So that kind of pulled me in. I'm just like, oh man, this is freaking awesome. This is how it's supposed to be, and that kind of, like we stayed friends through my entire career, even after the career. His wife, Debbie, was fucking awesome. So we would, I stopped, my first deployment was in Bosnia. That's how old I am. So I came home, they had PCS to Germany from Hawaii. So I stopped there afterwards, stayed about 2 weeks with them. Went around, did all kinds of stuff in Germany. They showed me around Germany, everything else like that. And then they had eventually come back to Hawaii, and they like retired out of Hawaii, and then they went to Arizona. So that was it. But he had passed away, got some real like super shitty rare kind of cancer. I think from like radiation stuff that he was around, like all the radios, all the HF stuff, and then a lot of the freaking chemical stuff that was in like Desert One when he was running around with all SF teams and stuff.
Yeah, a lot of those guys I know that.
Yeah.
Some mysterious cancer.
Yeah, they're like, "Oh, it's like 1 in 5 million chance of getting this." They're like, "Oh, and the entire team, all 12 of you have the same shit. Oh my God, that's so weird." And they're like, "Oh yeah." But so that would that kind of set a really good it's like if you have like a young puppy and you have like an old like wise dog, like the dog freaking teaches the dog how to dog, and then adopts a lot of those same attributes and all the other stuff like that. And Mitch was that guy for me, and so that was awesome. And that had gone through. Let's see. So after I went to Hawaii, after that I was over in Korea for a year, and that sucked balls because that was like freaking Korea smells like poo anyway. Like even worse than like Clovis, New Mexico. Like it just smells like poo all the time. It's
That's
just
hard
miserable.
to believe.
No, it's for real. So I actually flew out September 10th, right, from Hawaii, and then of 2001. So I land for my layovers, big layover in Japan before I could get into Korea. So I'm tired because I'm traveling and all the other stuff. And then like, it's like, like you go to like Asian countries when you're on like Asian Airlines, like the seats are even smaller than what they are in like domestic US flights. So you're just like, this is the most miserable shit ever. And then like they don't serve like chicken or beef. They're like, oh, would you like some eel? It's like, no, I don't want a fucking eel. I want a fucking hamburger or something. So put out, I'm just like sleeping. It was like 4 or 5 hour layover, and then like the flight into South Korea was getting in there that night. So I flew in, and as soon as I got there, I'm like, what is going on? Because everything was like locked down. Big military presence in the airport. Everything else just armed guards, and so I, totally oblivious because nothing was on the news yet about what had freaking happened in the Twin Towers and Pentagon and stuff. So I'm just like, oh, so we drive over to a Yongsan where I was going to stay like the night, and then like my unit was going to come pick me up and then freaking snatch me up the next day. So when we started pulling into base right there, I'm just like, oh crap, like they had all the barriers out, they had helicopters, spotlights, all the dogs were out. I'm like, man, they had freaking 50 cows loaded mounted on the. There's just like, oh man. So my immediate thought, I'm like, man, Kim Jong-un must be fucking up. Like he must have stuck his toe across like the DMZ and been like, still had no idea what was going on. Well, there was and I had been to Korea several times because we would always support all the major like named exercises for all the army and stuff like that. Right. Because it was part of PACF. And but like it had never been like that until I showed up. So I'm like, oh, Kim Jong-il must be freaking getting crazy with it. So we go to my hotel. I was supposed to have in the Dragon Hill Lodge. I was supposed to have like my own room, for like that night, and then one other night they're gonna pick me up on Monday or something. And then so they're like, oh no, the exercise wasn't able to get out on the flights because all the flights were grounded. So everybody's still in their rooms from the exercise, and there's overflow set up at the about half a mile down at the fire department. And so it was just bunk beds and cots that were just slammed. There's probably like 20, bunk beds in the room. So it was just like snoring and farts all night of people who were tired from traveling in because we couldn't get in the hotel. So I was tired from traveling. I just threw my stuff down, fell asleep, crossed the international date line. So I don't even know what time it was. I just slept until I woke up, probably about 10 in the morning there. And then, everybody that was in the room was gone. I'm like, oh. And then, so I got up, and then like everybody was crowded around the team room watching the big TV and watching the aircraft go into the, freaking tower. I'm just like, oh man. And then like Wolf Blitzer started talking, and they kept showing replays that aircraft going in the building. And so I'm just looking for a cup of coffee. Right. So I'm like, fuck. And there's just like, like you freaking kill the Joe, you make Samo. Like, I'm like, come on, where's the coffee? So I freaking get a cup, and we're still watching stuff. So I go, like a fucking dumbass, I go, well, what movie you guys watching? Because that plane looks fake as fuck, like flying into the tower. And then like everybody does the, freaking looks back, and I'm like, geez, freaking tough crowd. And then Wolf Blitzer started talking. I'm like, Wolf Blitzer is a terrible actor. Seriously, what movie you guys watching? The guy's like, this really happened, asshole. And I'm like, what? And then I'm like, oh. Sipping coffee, just trying to back out, I'm like, oh man, that sucks. So I ended up staying there for about 4 weeks until they could, get out of ThreatCon Delta to come pick me up and bring up to, Free Camp Red Cloud Aura Station for that year. And then it was like, hey man, go to your room. Here's your room. Put your stuff down, get a uniform on, and then come to the bunker. They're about to seal the bunker again. And I'm like, seal the bunker? Oh shit.
If you're enjoying this video, I want to take a second to talk about EliteU.com, where you'll be able to find early access to all of our YouTube content, as well as exclusive interviews and access to mentors. And now back to the video.
So Camp Red Cloud is 2nd Infantry Division's freaking headquarters, right? And so they didn't know what was going on. Nobody really knew what was going on. Everything was still in Delta. They didn't know who was involved, if there was another axis of evil and all this other stuff. So just to be safe and be able to freaking operate everything else like that, they freaking put us down in the ground in the bunker, freaking sealed the, and then we were down there for like 2 or 3 weeks. And let me tell you how gross that place was. No air conditioning. It was just air coming through. And so there was a table and then another table on this side of the room, about a room this size. You had, it was basically like a mirror image. So we had our radio stuff over here. South Koreans had the radios over here. They had their table right here. And then they had 2 or 3 officers, like American officers, 2 or 3 freaking Korean officers sitting over there. And it's like 90 degrees with like freaking the worst heat. There's like water drip, walking down the walls because it's so humid down in the bunker. And when those, freaking local nationals started sweating, like, because like they would just eat kimchi and all this stuff and it would like come out of their sweat. So it was like, it was like freaking kimchi sweat, body odor freaking from like America and South Korea just joining and not circulating or whatever. So it was just,
Awesome.
It was bad. And so we sat and did all the radio stuff. And then, this is back before we had like TVs and screens. So we were still doing like acetate maps, drawing where all our guys, because we had shotgunned like all the JTAC teams from the other bases in freaking Korea out to all the, freaking high point OPs to, in case anything kicked off, we already had guys there to start, calling in close air support and stuff like that. And we sat there for like 2 or 3 weeks until they freaking called off to figure out like what was going on, unsealed the bunker. And then like, you're going out, you're like, oh God, you haven't seen, light for like 3 weeks. And then it's like this big old light hits you. And then it's like, oh, we're on the surface and we have sun, but we just changed smells from, mix of, different nationality body odors to shit. So I was like, okay, great. So that was my year in Korea. And then they, Air Force said, hey, do you want to stay in PACAF and go back to Hawaii, or do you want to go to Fort Hood, Texas? And I'm like, really? So of course I went back to Hawaii. And then at that point, that's when, freaking John Knipe was there, all the other stuff. That's when we started doing all the combative stuff shortly after that. And then just started like deploying at the cyclic rate. So that was that jam. 05.
I would like to eventually get John on the Elite U.
Yeah. Oh, for sure.
Tell some badass stories. But we'll review a little bit because I'm sure he was one of your mentors over the years.
Yeah.
Kind of like that.
Oh man.
So who is he? And
so John Knipe is like for anybody who was one of John's guys, it was the same thing. Like they would follow that guy in the depths of hell just because, and he would lead you there too because he's
crazy.
Fucking crazier than fucking crazier than a shithouse rat, but fucking awesome. Always took care of his dudes, everything else like that. And, call him Teflon John because there's a lot of choices which are probably not the best choice to make, but he made them. He freaking punched through it. He freaking owned it. And but they're like, man, we can't. Like this guy's a freaking serial killer. Like we need this guy in the battlefield. We don't need him. Freaking anywhere else. So he actually kind of a funny story. I'll tell it to you offline, and then we'll decide whether to put it on camera or not. Anyway, he put on Senior Master Sergeant because he was one of the 12 Outstanding Airmen of the Year or whatever, so you pretty much go to whatever base he wanted to do. Right. He was planning on retiring. He's like, oh, I want to go to Hawaii. I've been doing all this stupid shit up, because I want to, freaking sit on the beach and, freaking hang out and do stuff. We're like, okay. So he came over there, and that was like a breath of fresh air because he had like a lot of the freaking conventional mindset guys that were still at, freaking Hawaii because they supported freaking 25th ID there on the island. And so when John came in, because he did not see things the way that other people saw, he just wanted to get things done, get his guys trained, freaking work out, and then start, working on like Z cuts and, all the other stuff like that. And that was, when you see a guy that is like, he's been in forever, the highest, freaking rank, and like all he wants to do is just continue to train and train and train and train. You're just like, oh, wow. Because usually, like once you get up in those senior ranks, a lot of people kind of lose their will and their drive because they're more into, oh, I'm getting close to retiring. So I got to, work on my college education stuff. And I got to work on all my, freaking shaking hands and kissing babies stuff. Cause now I got to be sort of a politician, sort of a daycare guy to get these higher ranks to be able to retire and whatever. So they kind of lose their spark. This dude was John was just rolling freaking hard the whole time. He's like, no, we're here. We're fuck tech, please. We're here to kill motherfuckers, and that's it. So we need to make sure that we're in the best shape. We need to make sure that we have the best training. Make sure that all of a sudden, blah 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 blah, and that's it. All this other stuff, I don't care about. Like this, this is of course back before green dot training and pronoun training and all the other stuff, like back when, you know, the military still had kind of a sense of itself and not, like, well, we're talking about, you know, dudes chopping things off or chicks gluing things on or whatever. Meanwhile, China, Russia, and Iran are training, you know, like their kids to fucking kill us. So
all important topics
yes.
of today's military.
Yes. Sure. So, but John was awesome. He did things a lot different. I mean, it would be random in the day, be like, "Oh, everybody change out. We're gonna go for a combat run." And you're like, "It's 2:00 in the afternoon. What's going on?" And he's like, "Yeah, we're gonna go run. We're gonna go run to the pineapple fields." It's like, well, no, because the hunter or the Dole plantation dudes have shotguns with salt rock. He's like, "Well, you better run fucking fast then, huh?" And you're just like, "Oh my god!" So we're like, you know, running through because, you know, it takes like 8 years to grow a pineapple. So like when people like pull over to the side of the road and start stealing pineapples, they're like, "Nope," and they shoot them with salt rock. So I'm like, "Fuck, John." He was like, "Yo, we'll go run by the house. You can bait him out." It's like, "No, dude." So, but that's just the way that he was. We were supporting exercise in Thailand, and that was like one of the coolest freaking trips ever. So John was heading that one up, and he goes, "I'm only going to go if I can pick my guys." So he picks all his freaking dudes. So he had his short little team. So we get on the ground. We're like, "Oh man, we've been flying forever. Guys just want to go to sleep." And he's like, "All right, everybody change out, freaking take a shit, and then meet downstairs in 30 minutes. And we're like, "Oh." We go down there, and he's like, "Well, we're going to go walk around get something to eat." He goes, "No, we need to find weapons." He goes, "Because I don't know if any of you guys, you know, were able to bring knives or whatever, but mine got freaking confiscated when I checked my bag and all this other stuff." So we're in like these back alley towns, and I'm like, "Dude, this is bad." Like we haven't even been on the ground for like an hour. We checked in our hotel. Everybody's tired, and you know, guys are like, "Oh, blah, blah, blah," and they're like rolling out like, you know, "Oh, freaking machetes." Also, like we had knives like that day, and he's like, "All right, always carry your knives. You need help. Freaking don't go anywhere. You know, stay in twos and all this other stuff. I don't care what you do on your own time, but every morning at 4:30, we're down here. We're going for a freaking run. We're going for a combat run." And we're like, "Oh," and like running out on the streets of Thailand is not like running on the streets in like the United States, because everybody has a dog and they're not tied up, like they're in front of their shit. So when you, and like the roads are super narrow roads. And so you're like, we'd get chased by dogs every day. And then we're like, "Oh God." And so we'd always, you know, we'd come out and then like we'd get ambushed by another pack of dogs. So like we never had a route. We just ran where the dogs were not. And we're like, "Dude, we don't, you know," and like we were there for like 4 or 5 weeks, you know, for that exercise. And he's like, "Well, no, we're still gonna fucking run every morning. That's why you got knives. What do you guys?" So that's just the way that he thought it was awesome. Love working for him, and anybody, you know, same thing, like common trait, like anybody that tried to mess with this stuff, he, you know, if you tried to mess with one of John's guys, he would be up in your stuff, and he's a very intimidating person when he's up, because like you look in his eyes and you're like, "Oh my God, there's a demon in there." There's no soul, it's just a demon. So it's awesome. Yeah, I fucking love John. He's
So yeah, I want to get him on there.
He would be great. Yeah.
He has the ability to tell story after story after.
And he's deadpan, because he just does stuff and it's like naturally funny or entertaining, but he doesn't see it that way. Like he's just John being John. So it's like that's some of the fun part.
So was the knife thing before or after my father came out too?
That would have been before, and then it was shortly after he came back in there. You know, as he started talking, and you know, he was showing us some of the Z-Cut stuff. He was walking us through some of the line program, everything else like that. And then we got deployment orders come back up, and so how that came to be. This is a good story. So John goes and pitches to the commander and some of the other senior leaders there in the free commanders meeting. He goes, "Hey, for our pre-deployment train up, I want to bring out this guy, Rondon Vito. When I was up at 10th Group, he came out and you know, trained us for months and months of just awesome shit. And we would go see him, and he would come up and see us. And it's all the knives, you know, basically all the combative skills that we are going to need, you know, prior to going for our first stuff. Our guys at least have the tools and the mental, you know, tools to, you know, if we can do what they need to do out there." Right. And they're like, "Okay, well, it sounds good, but you know, we got other things in the budget, you know, that are a little bit more." He's like, "Oh, okay." So he come back and forth and talk with Ron. He goes, hey, if we bring you out for X amount of dollars, is that cool? He goes, okay, yeah. He goes, okay, I'm going to work on it. So he found whatever was left in the budget, like freaking put it together. Like that was one of, John's other like magic, freaking superpowers was if he didn't know something just by, freaking converse, it's like he knew your aura and he knew like what you knew. And so he was always going to put the person who was the smartest for either, building a document, reading a reg or all the other stuff like that. So he was not of the mindset of where I'm in charge, I'm the highest rank, you do what the fuck I say, or like, and that's it. He goes, I don't know. He's pretty smart on this. So he would put together these like brain trusts to freaking do everything. So he would go up and then of course he would walk in, hey, I figured out all the budgetary stuff. We have, freaking money to pay for this training. And they're like, oh no, we don't. He goes, oh yeah. And like, they look at it and then like they give it to the, freaking RA and he's like, the numbers are good. Everything is good on that. And then they're like, John, like, how did he figure that? It's like they'd always get pissed because they could never figure out how he was always like right and all his stuff and everything was up. But it's because he freaking understood the talents and the skill sets of all of his guys, and he was able to freaking put them in the right order. Fantastic. I haven't seen anybody do that better than he did. So they go up in, and then they drove down to Hickam Air Force Base, and then they had like the like freaking command meeting down there where they're presenting budgets and all this other stuff, and so. They present the combatives budget, everything else like that. And they're like, oh, this last item on our list is this combative stuff. And he said, yeah. And they said, these are like pilots, free air crew guys that are, generals and colonels. And we're like, do we really need to train our guys in combatives? I mean, we're Air Force. They're like, yeah, your JTACs are going to be supporting stuff. They're going to be dealing with, freaking prisoners. You're going to be dealing with all this other stuff, local nationals, all that, because they're going to be, like embedded with freaking Army. And they're like, well, okay. So they do that. So we start making all the plans to freaking come out. We book all the freaking rooms. We get everything. And, the next week after everything is already booked and like everything is in motion to freaking happen, 2 weeks after that, they are back at that same meeting. They said, oh, some other budgetary stuff come up. So we're going to go ahead and cut the combatives. And, John goes, you sure about that? And they're like, so there's the other like senior leaders from 25th ASOS. There's a general sitting there. Yeah, we're going to cut the combatives. And he's like, are you sure about that? And then these dudes are like, just go pale. They're like, oh, shut the fuck up. You want to get out of here? And he goes, if anybody dies, I think you're going to be the person that's responsible for that because this is the training that's going to keep them doing that. And they just like was staring, like they're just like, John, come on. And then the general's like, oh. So he leaves and then calls me into his office. He's like, this is some bullshit. I said, what's going on? So he tells me, he's like, yeah, man, they're going to cancel our combatives training. So I said, okay. So he goes, but you know what? I said, what's that, John? He said, we ain't canceling shit. And I'm like, what? I'm like, what do you mean? He goes, we're doing it. He's like, I'm in charge. We're doing it. I'm like, fuck yeah. Like, like someone that just like fights for the dudes. Like, it's like, dude, you have my sword. It's like, so he goes, here's what you should do. He said, all the people that we train with, all the units that we work for exercises, everything else like that, I want you to go talk to them and see if they have any people that are interested in doing combatives. He said, because then instead of being just our unit, we'll have like 4 or 5 units, get the cops, get, freaking, like medical personnel, anybody that wants to, that's cool. He said, but here's the thing. He said, we're going to pay for it out of our own pocket. And he goes, and what we're going to do is, he said, I'm going to make out a price structure for all of the, for all the ranks so that, like an airman isn't paying like, 5 of his $50 paychecks or whatever. So he came out with an amount like up through, because there's a couple captains, a couple majors, everything else like that. He said, yeah, he said, we can get like 15 more people, we can cover the cost. And so I went out and he goes, you're my trusted agent. I expect this to freaking happen. Come and brief me on it. So I'm like, I cannot fail him. So I freaking go down there. I find our 15 guys. I said, hey man, we're good. I said, we're still short a little bit on this amount. And he's like, all right. So he calls Ron, lets me know what the, is happening. And of course, Ron, just like one of the greatest freaking people in the world, best heart. But he's like, I'll just come out and do it. It's just like, not a good businessman. But, if you're like, hey man, these guys are going downrange. Can you fly out tomorrow and train them? He would be already on a plane. Like that's pretty solid, awesome individual. So Ron says, hey man, whatever like is cool. Everything is already booked. We're coming anyway. So like whatever you can figure out. And I'm fine. Right? He's like, okay. So now the following week in the big meeting down on Hickam, they're sitting there, and then these two are like, oh, finally, like, okay, just a meeting where John isn't going to talk or get us in trouble or have us go to detention or stay after school. And so John's in there and he's super intense, like staring a hole through this freaking general. He's blah 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 blah. We have this. Okay, is there any other stuff that needs to be brought to the floor before we close out this meeting? And John's like, yeah. And then they're like, no, please, God. And he goes, I wanted to bring up the combative stuff. Like, oh yeah, we had tabled that last time and we're not going to do it because we don't have the budget. He goes, I found the money. And then the general goes, what do you mean you found the money? We're not approving that that part of your budget to go that way. We're not going to pay for that. And he goes, I figured you might say that, so we're going to pay for it ourselves. And he goes, what does that mean? He goes, everybody from the airmen up to the majors that want to go. We invited some of the other folks around from your command, from the, he goes, so we're going to have about 4 or 5 squadrons working together doing combatives, and we're going to all come out of pocket because everybody that's on that list that's going to attend that training knows that it is worth their while and it's in their best interest because they're all going to be, redeploying to have that training underneath their belt. So again, these two guys fucking pale white. They're like, oh, God damn it. Fuck. I just want to go home. And then John's like, staring at the freaking, and so he like sits there for about 2 minutes, and John's just staring a laser in his head, and then he goes, everybody except the 25th ASIS guys are excused. You guys stay around. We need to talk. And so now these two are like, freaking, piss going down their leg into their boot because they're like, what did John get us into now? And he goes, what do you mean you're paying for it yourself? He said, everybody is coming out of pocket from their Air Force salary to, off their paycheck to fucking, pay for this combatives class, for this, fucking martial arts, combatives fucking guru to come out. And he goes, I can tell you from being at the 10th group, everything else like that, it's legit. Like, this is going to save your people. And he's like, well, that's illegal about a million different ways and all this other stuff. He goes, I understand that, but I also understand that we're sending our freaking dudes into a combat zone where we have a high likelihood that, some of them aren't going to come back. But, at least if that happens, we know that we've done everything possible to, if we can prepare them for whatever they might encounter. And he's like, well, I still don't feel good about it. And he goes, well, you know what? And this was his, his little twist. He says, I already called the base newspaper, so they're going to be out there covering our entire course. And he goes, what do you mean? He goes, well, they thought it was really cool when I called the PA office and said, hey, you want to get some cool action shots of dudes like head stomping stuff and, throwing each other around. They're like, oh yeah. And he's like, oh, there's gonna be 4 or 5 squadrons working together and teamwork and, Air Force, for excellence in all we do. And freaking, and they're like, so he goes, yeah, so they're going to be out the whole time. He goes, we're having them come out for 3 weeks. And then the general's like, he goes, bring those guys back in so that, his execs come in. He goes, we need to fund this. And they're like, well, I thought we knocked off the table. He goes, no. He goes, we need to fund this now. I can't have freaking airmen coming out of their own pocket to pay for training that we should be providing for them. He said, and they're like, oh, he goes, I don't care where it comes from, find it. And they're like, yes, sir. And then they leave. And then these two are just like, oh man, if I'm still, the general's vision is based on notion. If I'm still, he won't know that I'm here, And so he tells John, he goes, Sergeant Knight. So yeah, I know you're one of the 12 outstanding airmen of the year. He goes, but do me a favor, don't spend any more of your aces because they're no good here anymore. I'm going to do this one for you, but that's about it. And then John goes like, for now, and then gets up and walks away. It's just like, oh. So of course, like, you know, all this like information of what happened in these meetings came out over, you know, barbecues, and we're laughing and, you know, freaking drinking beers and just laughing and shit. But, you know, bottom line, freaking Ron came out for 3 weeks. We had just freaking amazing time. Like just watching those people transform in that 3 weeks, just from like being bitches to, you know, they're just like, everybody's bruised, and just cause there's no mass, it's like, they're like, oh, well, what facilities are you use? They're like, we just need a piece of ground to throw each other down on and, you know, beat each other up on. And so it's like, it's funny. It's like, that whole piece of land, you know, like when I went back, because it was right behind where the baseball diamonds were.
Right.
It was that big, huge open field. It's like, you know how like from like the original Woodstock in the 60s, how like all those hippies came there for the festival, but like the land is never like healed from that stuff. Like there's still like all the missing grass where we were just like doing zoo, you know, freaking stuff. They're like, so all that grass still has not grown back in there. It's still worn out. Like the earth is worn out. And then there's little hedges, and it's like, oh, you see like little heel divots from all the heel stomps everywhere. It's like, wow, these used to be like a shooting range, like a bombing range or something, because the ground's all fucked up. But it's still there. When I was back here, it was, 2019 was the last time I was back in Hawaii. And I just went driving around Hickam to see what's changed and everything. And then I saw that field. I'm like, that field is still jacked up. And that was like 02, 03 is when that happened. So, but that was, you know, like some of my favorite stories of John Knight. And then from there, he'd helped me get my package put together, like make some phone calls to who I needed to drop it off to, you know, go up to the 17th STS after there. And then I went to there and I was off to Bragg. And that was my next point there. And that was, and then at Bragg was awesome because, you know, some of the dudes I was with in Korea, you know, like originally I was going to Benning, and then I got a call from one of my buddies. He's like, hey man, we saw your package and we snatched it. We're going to bring you to Fort Bragg. Are you okay with going to Fort Bragg? I said, well, who's there? He's like, oh, let's see. Pav's here, Nate's here. It goes through. I'm like, oh, that's like half our Korea crew. He goes, yeah, man, we saw your name. We want you to come over and stuff like that. So I switched from going to Benning to the Rangers over to support 3rd and 7th group when they were still up in North Carolina. And that was awesome because that was like, so like, you know, Hawaii was the coolest location, you know, and then eventually like when we started deploying, it was cool. Right. But then like, you know, like when I got to, you know, Bragg with the 17th SDS, that was the coolest mission and the cool, you know, job. But then like, it was like Fayetteville. So like, it was, you know, crappy location, but we weren't there very much anyway. So, cause like you're always deployed and stuff, but just amazing training opportunities, just a lot of the, you know, that freaking 3% of the TACP, you know, career field that goes up to that stuff. So you're just around just like freaking team guys. And that was awesome because did a lot of workups with all the different teams, a lot of different, you know, when they were going down to South America and they needed a, you know, extra comm guy, like, hey, Jay Jack, want to go for, you know, 2 or 3 months down to freaking Colombia? And we're like, fucking yeah. You know, so we had a lot of cool trips in there and, lots of deployments, everything. And then I took instructor duty over at STTS, do all the advanced skills training, and then finished up at the test center. So right. That was pretty much my career, all just like kind of wrapped up.
Yeah, so cool. That's your military career. We met when you were at what? Well, we first met at Fort Bragg, right? And then obviously we trained together for a long time. But after you were at Bragg, you moved over to basically here.
Field,
out at the STTS. And so you were an instructor and moving there. My question kind of revolves around all the generations that you were a part of inside that community. Both AFSOC and Special Forces. And every single older generation goes, you know, the new generation sucks. And I'm not looking for that kind of answer, but are there differences between, say, pre-9/11 mentors that you had and personnel that you worked with, and then obviously after lessons learned and, you know, there, and then obviously as we start to train the newer generations and pass skills on to them. Are there some key differences or things that you've noticed?
It's kind of one. It's it's like one of those, dated generational things. I mean, if you look back to, you know, all the old guys coming out of Vietnam and Desert One and everything else like that, that's pretty much the, core group of the senior leaders when I got in. So they're definitely a different look from what it was, in the early thousands, middle, freaking 2010 on, everything else like that.
Right.
Because at that point we were so entrenched in, Iraq and Afghanistan and, Syria, like lots of other places. So it was just, like everybody had switched over to like deployment mode. And then at some point in there, some person who was not a deployer said, "Oh, well, since this is a sustained operation in these places, we need to make sure that we're inspection ready and combat ready." It's like, I've read a lot of things. You can only be one or the other, never both at the same time. So it kind of, there was training there, but was it the best stuff? Was it changing at the rate of tactics and SOPs on the battlefield? No, it wasn't. It was teaching baseline things and then hoping those guys could basically take that as their foundation and then, tweak it to their scenarios or tweak it to, where they were going to next or whatever area that, like that they were going to. And then also the technology took off as well. Back in the old times, back in the late 90s, they were still, this is before we had multi-band radios and digital, everything was digital and, like miniaturized, and you had all these capabilities inside of one radio. We had 3 big ass radios we had to carry. There was no SATCOM at that time. So it was, we had the old Prick 77, we got rid of that, got the, so we had the Prick 104, which was HF comms, and that's basically was replaced by SATCOM. So we got rid of that one eventually. You had UHF, VHF was on the Prick 113. So that was another, big old radio. Took a square battery, about 4 pounds a piece. Took 2 of those each. The 104 took 2. And then we had the 119, which is the Fox mic radio. So we talked to our Army counterparts. That took 1 radio. But these 3 radios, if you smash them all together, it was that and that. So you were looking at each one is just probably 28 to 32 pounds with batteries and antennas and all the crap on it. So at that point, they had recruited. They're like, we want wrestlers, football players, and water polo players, because those dudes are pack mules and we can just load them up with whatever their stuff is and they can go. Then in the late 90s, 2000-ish, the freaking Harris 117 Fox came out, and then all that stuff was inside of one box. And we're like, yeah, like that was the best thing ever, because that took like 80 pounds out of your rucksack. And it was like, man, it all does it off of 2 batteries, so I don't have to carry all these extra batteries for all these things. So at that point, the technology had changed a lot of the tactics that we had, like normally done. Because now instead of trying to, do all the antenna, for antenna theory, making directional antennas and resistors and all the old, piecemealing stuff around, they'd move satellites over the top. So we just point it straight up, and then like we have long range comms off of satellites. So oh man, that's pretty cool. So all the tactics, everything adjusted with it. The technology on all the CAS aircraft got better. Everybody got sensors. Everybody had all these things. So it was a lot more efficient way to go. So a lot of those old field craft things started getting taught with lesser emphasis on it, which is okay, but you still have to know the analog way to do stuff, right? I mean, especially when we're looking at, near peer stuff is going to be our next jam. So, that means that we're not fighting cave people anymore. And that means that they have electricity and they have technology. So basically they can turn our shit off. We can turn their shit off. So when everybody's stuff is turned off, then what do you have? Because I can't use all this digital stuff. I can't use all these electronics. I got to go back to my, map and compass and my old style radios, because HF will still work because it works off the ionosphere of the Earth. Right. So, things like that. So I think the training got more kind of tech savvy without bringing along the core field craft that should have gone along with it and been taught as the foundation before you added on. Right. Because like if we had a field problem, if you had comms go down or like you broke an antenna, you had to figure out how to get your antenna fixed or make one out of field wire, however it was to still try to communicate and everything else like that. So there's a lot of those isms that like you figured out how to make a resistor out of a plastic MRE spoon so you can make a directional antenna out of a piece of field wire, like all these things. But now it's like oh no, my SAT antenna is broken, so I can't. It's like, well, we better figure out how to make it work. You better get some duct tape and bubble gum and do whatever. But
So Jack talks about the traits, or the number one trait being adaptability for operators that are effective. And that's something that isn't really taught as much anymore, even though it's talked about. When you have skill sets that can go down like that, and then you have to find a way, there's a lot more training that develops that, right? So like it's like a muscle. Like you have to continuously work it, and you have to be in different scenarios so that you have the ability to call upon that skill at any given time. And so what you're talking about is, as things became more efficient through technology, we went away from making things happen regardless of the scenario that you're in, right? And so that had a big effect, in your opinion, on
Absolutely, on training, on mindset, on everything for like these new generation of dudes, because part of that was, of course, everybody gives like the millennials shit for being pussies, but part of it, it still holds true into that stuff, because that's just how they were brought up. They weren't brought up, in the traditional sense of, if you're learning all these skills. And since they have like strong Xbox thumbs, they gravitate and they understand that stuff a lot, easier, because they've been around it. They know how all the electronic stuff works. And, still, I know you put like like my 10-year-old son can go on the computer. Hey, can you redo my firewall or something? I can't log on the computer. Oh yeah, daddy. Okay, here you go. Like, oh, right.
But that's also why certain training, like obviously my father came out to Hawaii for that training. I obviously continued that training. The stuff that me and Jack do usually has a very, very high shock value for the newer generations. And that's probably why, because it's so far removed from anything. Whereas before, the generations were coming from previous mentors that had thicker and harder skin than you could even develop, right? Like and so that is one of the things that, as we've talked over time, like trying to figure out, how do you build that resiliency? How do you get them back to used to that? At least, how do you get them to value that kind of training? Because it's not that you want to do it all the time, but at the same time, if you want to be hard, you got to do hard shit, right? Like, and the thing is that people don't want to do that anymore. And as more information is accessible, it seems like they use that as the thing that's directly in front, right? And so within AFSOC and within your career field, obviously technical prowess is a staple of that community, and it's brought to the forefront of, we are more technically capable, but at the end of the day, they are men in an operational field, and they need to be able to perform with their peers. And so that's definitely something that we've talked about.
Well, and that was something too, when you talk about like the TACP career field, and then you talk about more on the AFSOC side. If you are in the AFSOC like battlefield airman, special tactics world, you are on Air Force bases from cradle to grave up inside of some STS, and that's your jam. When you go out to support other units, that's fine, but then you come back to your teams and everything else like that. It's different from the like conventional, like every TACP starts out as a conventional TACP, and they're supporting all the basically like maneuver units of the Army. So pretty much when I got back here in 2010. That was Hurlburt was the first Air Force base that I've ever been stationed on in my career.
Right.
Because it's all by, with, and through. You're with whatever Army unit that you are, because you're attached to them as their JTAC. So it's a different thing, because we're Air Force, but we're more green than we are blue. Right. Where these guys are very, very blue going in with green. So that's why you would have some of the every discrepancy. Like when they would get a JTAC and it would show up, and it was like, they'd ask you like, "Hey man, you're a JTAC?" You're like, "Yeah." And like your first question, "Are you a combat control JTAC? Or you TACP JTAC?" And then you say, "Oh, I'm a TACP JTAC." And then, you have teams starting to go, oh, good. Well, like fucking, you're going to fucking work for me then. You're like, oh, what does that mean? He goes, oh, we had another guy in here. And it's like, oh, okay, cool. I don't want to, I just want to do my job and for you to do my best for you,
That was one of the, so I was out at the 2-6 with Colonel Michael Jensen. And that was one of the reasons why he brought me out there, was to get them used to being around certain individuals and their personalities, so that when they actually embedded with the teams, it was not the first time that they were around certain individuals.
Yes.
Right? So
yes.
They got used to that kind of personality, and that, whether that's an intimidation thing or that's just a different way of solving problems. That was a big part of that, was the mindset, being around individuals that are like that focus more on harder training and, that type of thing. Whereas obviously, if you're attached to the Army, you're already getting that in droves.
Yeah.
Not that there's anything that's not lacking in there, but the thing is that at least that part, being able to integrate with Army, you've been around them for a long time. And so that was one of the main
it's a different culture too, because now you're in the Army culture, but you're also in the Air Force culture, but your primary customer is the Army. So if you're going to have any like a credibility with the Army, everything else like that, then you need to be able to, freaking hold your weight with whatever they're doing, whether it's a school, whether all the other stuff. Because the first thing, especially for, TACPs, because up until just like 5 or 6 years ago, we didn't have any career field officers. So it was completely, it was a completely like enlisted run career field. We would get ALOs, active pilots, F-16s, F-15s, A-10 pilots, bomber pilots, whatever. They would come down for a 2-year ground tour to be our ALOs, air liaison officers. And then they would go back to the cockpit, because that was part of their career progression. We didn't have guys that were, cradle to grave TACP officers. Now we do. So things have changed a little bit more. And so at that point, like when we would walk in, you have a guy, fresh off a F-16, squadron and everything else like that. The only people that he's ever dealt with that were enlisted in his life are the people that fix his aircraft. So you like, all right, I'm to go play volleyball with the Top Gun guys. So, my left aileron is squeaking. If you could fix that, that'd be great. Like that's the only thing. And then they come back and they got a bunch of roughnecks that are, telling them what to do, and they don't know shit because they never have worked with the Army on the ground. But the way that the Army works is your credibility is on your chest with all your badges and, freaking schools that you've been to. So the first thing, they go, okay, man, what do you need? And if you're just slick and you haven't done any of the Army schools or worked with their, freaking guys, you're just like, get the fuck out of here. Go pull security on the Chow Hall tent or something, And then it was different too, because then they're like, all right, well, you're an enlisted guy. Where's your officer? So it's like, crap, like everything that we just, briefed them, we'd have to go find the ALO, and they would have all the new gear that, still had tags on it. And so you'd be like, hey, sir, you got to go roll around the dirt because you look too brand new. You need to get,
Right.
Oh, okay. And so we basically had to like hand puppet this motherfucker, like stick your hand up his ass and be like, hey, I just told him all this stuff, but you're a captain, so he's only going to listen to you. So you need to tell him this and this and this. And then we would like set him up, and then he would go and we'd stand behind him. And then he would tell him the same thing. Oh, yeah, that sounds great, Captain. And you're just like, Jesus. So that was kind of how that was. But, so we were very, very green in that aspect. And so, but then being the Air Force guys on the Army base, we were always had something to prove because we were the Air Force guys and we were the, like bucktooth redheaded stepchildren all the time until they got with us and they can see what we could actually do for them. And then they're like, oh, can you fix my radio? Can you do this? Can you do this? Is it okay if I come in your vehicle because it has heat? Like whatever it was. Stuff like that. But it was awesome because, that's like the real, world. And then, especially after 9/11, everything turned into a big joint world. So, I think, like being able to have that AFSOC, bubble to live in and train in and, be able to get all your, training stuff done is great. But to actually be embedded and like live the culture with the guys that you, train and fight with, I think that is more of the idea that would be more successful, especially in today's stuff. Cause your customer, cause you work with them and for you day in and day out.
You know exactly what they respect and what they don't respect. And, it's one of the things about reading people or embedding in cultures that you technically don't come from is actually understanding what they appreciate and then being able to lead with that. Like that's one of the things that we taught out at the 2-6 was I'm sure I'm going to get in trouble for this, but we called them man skills, like, it's just the fighting, shooting, never quit type attitude type training, just the mental conditioning. Because when you get attached to a special forces team, you don't have to be the best shooter, but if you're beating their guys like at the lower tier of their skill level, then they really can't say shit. If you go to the combatives room and you ball them up a couple times, then they can't really call you Air Force in the same tone as if, well, you performed the way that they thought that you should perform as Air Force, right? So that was one of the things, and obviously that type of mindset is lost on some people, especially the ones that don't want to train. But I have a couple other points that I want to go over really quickly. We're running out of time fast because you tell great stories, and
sorry,
that's why we usually get in trouble with our spouses because we hang out too long. So the common thread that you were talking about with your mentors was that intensity, that protecting their guys, being the one that is out front and driving. Are there any other common threads that you believe great mentors or people that you aspire to be have?
Like commonalities or common attributes that they have?
We've had very similar mentors, or one of my mentors. The thing is that when you try to strive to be a better version of yourself, one of the things that you can look at is these common threads, and then you can go, obviously you talked about some of the stuff that your father passed on to you, and that's common across the board, that resiliency, that, consistently driving towards that target, no matter how tough it gets, and putting your mind to something and finishing that job. You talked about that with your father and the upbringing that you had, but, are there other things that you've seen over time that maybe you grasped onto? That were a bit different?
I would say like one of the main things, like if there is, like if they have a sense of honor that you can sense within them, then that they're a good person, down at their core. When they say something, like they mean it, and it's not just like lip service, because that when that comes down and they have, like they're in a position where they have to physically demonstrate or, show, it's like, okay, well, does he really believe what he says? And then it's like, oh yeah, he does. Okay, well, cool. Like they have that loyalty, they have the buy-in, they have the other stuff, because, all those, folks that are looking up to that person, like that's who I want to, pattern my stuff off of, because that dude is squared away. He freaking carries a great deal of respect. No one is going to mess with that dude. Like he knows his stuff. He's smart, he's strong, and like he had, the freaking charismatic ability to like freaking lead men and get them to do, so it's like being a good instructor. It's not like, hey, look at all the cool shit I can do or all the cool stuff I can do. It's like, what can I get you to do? And that's, so when you look back on that and you're like, wow, that, that person, although we didn't see eye to eye on everything, like I look at how far he pulled not just me, but the entire team along with him. Right. And so when they have kind of all those things that, fit together, those are the guys that you want to work for. Because, just like the soccer players with my dad, it's like, if you can have someone where you feel really personally bad, like when you fail, because not because you failed it, because you let them down. Like right. If you have a person like that, that's a person worth holding on to, because that is like, it's like, I think that's how it should be,
Well, you said a couple of words that are lost in our culture today. At least it seems that way. You talked about honor. You talked about your word actually meaning something. Those are some old school tenets that people actually enforced. They're lost. You talked about loyalty. Not talking about blind loyalty, but finding somebody that you want to follow, because that they are going to take care of you, and they are demonstrating from the very first day that they are someone that you can trust, and regardless of what hiccup happens, you guys are going to be in it together. That whole family thought process, right? I'd like to elaborate on that, later on in different conversations. I'm going to push across the notebook, and if you can do a real quick story on this, or you can tell me, no, I can't talk about this, then we can go there. But I always found it a very funny thing when you talked about this can get this conspiracy theory thought processes, but you know,
Oh man, yeah, that probably wouldn't be good for camera.
okay.
That's funny.
Outside of great interviews and group talks, I would like to see if you could do some video series on some stuff that you've learned over the years that you passed on. Maybe
Yeah.
could you elaborate on some of the video series that
Sure.
you're going to work with us on at the Elite U? So like stuff that on how you do stuff that maybe are some good skills to pass on to the general public, and then maybe any type of virtual training courses
Okay.
that you can actually teach other people's skill sets on.
Okay.
So,
I would say, my main focus now, especially that I'm, like retired, got my, like my wife and my son, everything else. It's still, like when you make that big transition, it's like what things have made that transition, or like what things have made that transition successful for me? Like what keeps me busy, what keeps me from, just having idle hands and everything else like that. So, with, this goes back to my father, who's a very, very, very good guitar player. He played a very specific kind of like a blues guitar. Taught myself and my brother how to play, and that's one of those things that I can pick up anytime. Good day, bad day, in between. I'm on the road. I can throw something or bring like a little tiny freaking backpacker guitar on the plane with me, and then I have something, and all of the stuff is freaking good, especially for freaking TBI, PTSD type stuff. They're like, like music's one of the best things. Like anything where you're doing eye-hand coordination. If you're, like working on vehicles, taking things apart, putting them back together. If you're learning how to, do a skill, learn how to paint, learn how to do art, like do something where you can occupy your mind and your hands, and that's like one of the best things you can do to kind of, transition. So with my son, like we build tons of Star Wars Lego stuff. He's always in that Lego mode, so we do that. We take them out. I got a couple, freaking copies of the freaking Boy Scout freaking handbook with all the skills. So we'll teach them, like go in the backyard. Hey, we're gonna learn how to lash today. We're gonna learn how to sharpen a knife. We're gonna learn how to start a fire. We're gonna do all these, things. So he has, basic skills, because it goes into, I'm gonna backtrack a little bit. I was having a conversation with Josh earlier. It was, what's the difference? It's like, well, we had all these kind of, skills as we grew up that we just, like naturally had, because we didn't have internet, didn't have cell phones, didn't have anything else like that. So we were wondering, at the STTS, I was there from 2010 to 2014, and I was in phase 4. So it was the last phase before they had graduated and gone to their teams. And so I knew how I was brought up, and I was always curious. And so I would always tell them when we had a new class coming in, and they're in brief, I'd always, I said, hey, I'm going to ask you guys a series of questions, and if it pertains to you, I want you to stand up and remain standing until I'm done asking you guys questions. I said, okay, cool. So you got 20 students, whatever, in a class, and I would ask them. I just go through. I had a big list. I'd be like, were like any of you Boy Scouts, any of you Eagle Scouts, any of you guys camped outside, any of you guys shot a gun before, you gone to the range with your dad, you gone hunting, you played, like sports in high school. Has any of you guys done like wrestling or any freaking collegiate sports? Because, like we have guys that come in that have, like, oh yeah, college, didn't work out. Like, you freaking joined the military. All these other things of just like, that's how we played and that's how we grew up back in, my time. And so in like 2010, after I finished that whole like barrage of questions, everybody would be standing up. So it's like, okay, cool. And those are usually classes that went pretty smooth. But over the course of time and over the years, after I finished that same exact line of questioning, I would, out of the 20 people, I'd have like 3 or 4 people standing up. And it's just like, what are we doing? We're not doing any of our, kids, any, kind of service by not spending time with them and not, freaking ensuring that they know how to, freaking survive in the wilderness or go camping or, operate a, freaking handle weapons safely, all stuff like that. And so that, like, like those are skills that I try to pass off to my son. Freaking weapon safety, freaking take him shooting, I mean, demystify the dangerous, scary gun. So it's not a dangerous, scary thing. Same thing with, knives or any other tool that you have. Teach them and train them and, give them safety briefs so they understand the consequences. They understand, hey, this is a, serious tool, and then how to like respect it and take care of it.
Right.
So those are all the things that, because when you only have, 3 of those, 20 guys standing up, and then when you get out and you're like, you put them out in the field, and it's just like, oh, this is bad. Yeah. Instead of training, it turns into more like herding cats for the entire time, making sure they don't like go like, freaking, try to hug a bear or, no. freaking kiss a rattlesnake or something,
It's the same thing with our training. In our training, what happens is I used to ask, how many of you have been in a fight? How many of you taken a punch before, like a real punch from somebody that actually meant to hurt you? Obviously, as years went by, I wasn't able to ask that question because the answer was no one. Right? Was, you went from half the class to being absolutely zero. Mainly because if they were accustomed to violence, then, they didn't really make the requirements to get into the military. We can get into all that. So I changed my questioning to how many of you play contact sports, which is a weird thing because most of them, if you ask, have you played sports, you then have to differentiate between actual sports and the shit that they play on their console.
Yeah.
Right. Because I've had a number of classes where I realized that there was a higher percentage of people raising their hands, and in their mind, it's the same thing, and the thing is that the interpersonal skills that you learn when you are on the field and shit gets emotional and being able to deal with that, and it's physical, and then being able to get up, shake hands, hug, go back to fucking playing, taking a hit, that type of thing, a hit as in, being tackled, is a completely different kind of, upbringing than somebody that basically is super pale because he's never been outside, and and so what happens is it's not that it's impossible to train those individuals, but you are having to teach skill sets and mindset and these lessons that they should have learned when they were 7, 8, 9, 10, all the way through their high school, and so it's like that wasn't that bad. You can keep going, like there is that part to it. You just have to change your class a little bit, so I really like the thought process of being able to create a couple videos on how you personally hit certain subjects like gun safety and what you feel are important skill sets to pass on to Dylan, and how that went and lessons learned and that type of thing, because I know that for a good portion of people trying to do their best with their child, there's always that, am I doing the right thing? Am I passing on the skills as best as possible? And so especially for those that never received that from their home life, that's something that people could just lean into and go, oh, that's, I always wanted to do that with my father, and maybe he wasn't present, or maybe he didn't have those skills. Like as we go further and further into technology being the primary way of entertainment and learning, we're going to get entire generations that their father actually didn't even know how to do these things. Right. And so that's one of the things I want to actually catalog and put on the Elite U. The guitar playing focuses on the after service.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Like me and you have talked about, how do you solve the issue with suicide and the loss of identity when people get out of service. You know, it is a sad thing because what happens is they are a part of this identity. They have their family, they have, a regimented schedule, day in, day out. And then what happens is they get out and they were that, Ranger, they were that Marine, they would and they still feel that in their heart, but they're actually not continuing. And that's where depression comes in because they don't have an outlet to search for. Right. Absolutely. And so I'm really excited to have a section of the Elite U where we can kind of focus on skill sets where they may be interested in doing that and passing that on. So
a lot of those after service things, because you go from like everything is scripted and you've done it so many times where it's like, here's my daily stuff, here's my TDY schedule. Everybody kind of goes into their mode. We're going to support this event. We're going to do this exercise, whatever it is. So you have a place to be, and you're an important part of that whole picture. And then you get out, and they give you like 10. And you're like, okay. And you're like, cool, thanks for playing. And then you go home, and it's just quiet, and you're like, now what the fuck am I supposed to do? You know. And so it's really, those small steps to kind of finding your purpose, or like your new purpose, what your new mission is, and trying to make sure, and like we talked about it before in other conversations, about trying to make sure that you still have that balance, where you still have your identity, you still are your person. It's like, but it's not like oh man, I used to be somebody, I used to be cool, like all this stuff. It's being able to move on, like close that chapter, still remember all the lessons that you learned from that shit, but then like freaking pivot 180 degrees, and then like, cool, I'm done with that, and I have all that stuff that I freaking took away from it, but now I have this whole rest of my life here to live. And then especially with like having families and stuff like that, it's like, what is your new goal? Well, your new goal and your new team is your family. And so if like we're a good teammate there, you better be a freaking even better teammate to your family, because that's your blood. And you'll still have your relationships, you'll still have your friends come over, and you'll just like be sitting by a campfire drinking beers, talking about oh dude, yeah, that was fucked up, remember that, like all the fun stories to like recall. But you have that new responsibility, you have that new mission to
and your new inner circle can be comprised of old teammates.
Yep.
Your new purpose is in your opinion as important, if not more important, than that identity that you had previous, and that's what allows you to be healthy mentally as you push into a different phase of your life. So I think we have certain individuals that will be able to speak on that on a more professional level, but that has always been one of the things where people have suggested. One of the things I did was I ran my schools, and that was a huge factor for a lot of individuals that retired, not just from the military, but from everything else. Like, you're giving them a different set of milestones, and what happens is they enjoy it, and then that becomes something that they dive into. And if they didn't have that, they would have a very quick spiral into bad places.
Yep.
Dark times at night inside their head. So I really appreciate you focusing and being able to do that for the elite you, and then everybody that's watching. To close that out, is there anything that you are going to try to plan out for like a virtual training course, kind of like with
so I was gonna and like we can kind of like refine it a little bit more, but I would like to do some kind of maybe some instructional stuff for guitar, some instructional stuff for doing gun safety for kids, or how to kind of teach them the skills that they need to have to basically be have foundational skills for whatever else they go,
right,
whether it's military or not, whether like all those skills, mental toughness, everything else like that. It transfers over to whether like they choose to do. So I like to kind of sit down, talk with you and Jack, and figure out, which ones would best fit, and what, like what has the most interest. If it's something that I know how to do or something I'm good at, I'm more than happy.
Well, absolutely. The family dynamic, I think what we should do is we should grab a bunch of the mentors, because they all have families, and then we can all talk about, how those things were introduced to their families, lessons learned, things to watch out for, personalities, with their children, and, all those types of dynamics. I think that falls directly into that. And then we'll have some sort of professional kind of overview, the things that we did right and wrong. Your career field falls around proficiency with radios and stuff like that. Would you be able to provide a baseline program for people that are interested? Everybody that usually focuses on our skill sets or agree with us or whatever is interested in these topics, they tend to fantasize about the great apocalypse that is coming at some point, and being able to communicate is obviously
well, shoot, we can communicate. I'd be happy to throw something together for the communication stuff. Done a lot of kind of recent spectrum studies and stuff for different, like aspects that the military is, trying to like develop and capabilities and stuff. So I think as far as putting something together for like some ham radio, type like home base stations, how you would use that when, like either during the great freaking apocalypse, when everything's burned down, or even, I mean, like we're in Florida, so even during, hurricane season and stuff like that. So if you have your people that are, in your tribe that you need to, if we can keep in touch with, but cell phones don't work, everything else like that, how are you going to, communicate?
Yeah, I mean that's a great skill to have. As funny as we like to talk about the apocalypse, Jack was talking about that one winter where everything got shut down because they don't have ice storms, and then what happened is it kind of wiped out entire sections of Texas, and that's a good skill to be able to reach in your back pocket and be able to go, hey, I was taught this, or I actually know this, and in turn, utilize it. It may be a once in a lifetime use, but I did a video earlier today talking about no skill is more important than any other skill, and skills are only important when you need them.
Yeah.
So, all right, brother. Well, this was a great talk, and I
right.
know that we're going to be seeing a lot more of you. So,
absolutely.
Thanks, brother.
Appreciate it.
Thank you for watching, and if you enjoyed that content, we have more videos over here for you to check out. For those of you looking to enhance your knowledge, make sure that you go over to eliteu.com, where you will have early release of YouTube videos and access to exclusive content. Thank you for watching, and we will see you in the next video.